Alright, welcome to the first video. Again, I'm Mr. S. I'll be explaining some things to you. I do have a focus in chemistry, so that's where I'm going to start. These videos don't necessarily have to stay in chemistry. If people prefer to see some other type of science, by all means, feel free to drop a question into the comments. The biggest thing about chemistry, I feel, it's the most important, is knowing your periodic table. And so before I get into it, I'm just going to explain the game I'm playing and move on from here. This game is called Rimworld. It's just a resource management type game. I loaded into a save file that I already had going. This is my second colony. As you can see, I'm a little bit established because I quite like this game. I've been playing it fairly often. As the videos continue, I will probably be creating new colonies because this game has a lot of replayability, so I like to do that. So I'm gonna get them started and let them get to work because I've set some tasks for them to do while I explain. So in chemistry, any kind of chemistry course that you take, the most important thing for you to know, be aware of, and deal with is the periodic table itself. It is a resource for you to use at any time. There's no professional chemist who does not have access to a periodic table. I say this because that means you don't really need to memorize the whole periodic table. I know that there are people in the world, if you're taking a science class, that will tell you you need to memorize the whole thing. You have to know everything that goes on with the periodic table. You don't really need to know everything that goes on the periodic table. You need to understand it. You need to know what the deal is and what the numbers mean and what they represent. But you don't need to memorize the whole thing. If you can learn the patterns and patterns and properties of that periodic table, you are going to be well established to deal with anything that a general chemistry class or general science class or question you might have. So they'll allow you to do that. I just want to check in. I'm wasting a little power here. In this game, of course, as I said, it is resource management. Some of the management that you have to do is managing power. I have a fair bit of power going, 3 water mills, this is a couple of geothermals, some wind power, because I'm all about that clean energy right there. You got solar panels up here, some storage for batteries. I'm lacking on components, the things you need to build, technology like that. Notifications for visitors. I already did the trading. I bought some stuff from them, took their money because I had more to sell than they had to buy. Minor break risks because you have to additionally manage the people who are in your colony. Right now, these people attacked me earlier, trying to recruit them. Just to add and expand, the more people I have, you run the risk of not having enough food, which right now I really do have a lot of very low food. I don't know why I'm not getting a warning for that. It's probably because of all of these potatoes. So many potatoes. Back to the task at hand. So, periodic table. What is the easiest way to explain and understand the periodic table? Well, instead of memorizing all of the periodic table, the first thing that you need to remember is that you have 3 categories of elements. You have metals, non-metals, and metalloids. That's what they break down to. Metals are the majority of the periodic table. They take up the most space on there. That's what most elements are. They behave similarly to each other, like they're real similar. They can be smushed into flat sheets, that's where you get things like aluminum foil, or they can be drawn into wires for copper wires, like the PC that I'm playing on, or your cell phone, because I assume everyone has one and uses one because it's 2019. Pardon me. With that, the metals are good conductors of heat and electricity. So all of these, the power pipes that I've laid here, and if I click on here, I can show you all the power pipes. All these power pipes, they're running within the game, wires. Those wires have to be made out of metal in order to conduct electricity. So all this blue here contains metals in it. Why? Because it needs to. Otherwise, my power wouldn't be transferred easily, or well, or really at all, through any of my base. Non-metals, they're a bit harder to generalize with because there's a lot more variances with them, so they can be really not similar to each other at all. That doesn't mean there aren't some similarities. Most of your non-metals, they're going to be gases. You have the noble gases on the far right of the periodic table. And then there's what I consider the most important group of elements that you should know. The most important group of elements on the periodic table that you need to remember in order to be able to use the periodic table efficiently and well are the metalloids. Sometimes called the semi-metals, sometimes just referred to as metalloids, and the reason they are called that is because they behave as both metals and non-metals. It's situationally dependent for them. So what are the metalloids? Well, the metalloids are the smallest group on the periodic table. They're the smallest section of them. There's 7 of them, really, that you need to care about. Some scientists will argue that there are 8. I consider there to just be 7. It'll really be up to your science teacher how many they want you to know. But if you start with these 7, you'll be in a pretty solid spot to do everything that they want you, they being the science teachers, want you to do and understand with the periodic table. Those 7 metalloids, in order, on the periodic table, it's boron, silicon, germanium, arsenic, antimony, tellurium, and astatine. Well, that's pretty beautiful aurora. It's lighting up the sky. Hooray. See it if I zoom in. Sort of. Some nice little color change. Well, I can also speed them up and make them move a little faster because why not? Let's make time move a little quicker. I'm sure you wish you could do that in the classes that you take. Everybody gets bored occasionally. We're all people. So those 7 elements, they are, for understanding the periodic table, the most important thing. So I'm not going to tell you to memorize those 7 elements, but if you're gonna memorize part of the periodic table, it should probably be those 7. Those 7 of the periodic table separate your periodic table into its parts. So they make a little stair-step ladder. Boron is number 5 on the periodic table. Silicon is 14, germanium is 32, arsenic is 33, antimony is 51, tellurium is 52, astatine is 85. If you know where those elements are on the periodic table, you can identify what type of element any element is, if it's a metal, non-metal, or metalloid. So if you know the metalloids, you can easily say, oh, I have this element, it's over here, it's this type of. To explain that a little, the metalloids with their stair-step, what it determines is a separation between your metals and your non-metals. So to the left of the stair-steps that the metalloids create, there's a fire, because he hit a trap. So to the left of the stair-step that metalloids create, and that's to the left of any of those 7 metalloids, you will have a metal. All of the elements to the left of them, they're all metals. That's how it is. To the right of that stair step, all of the elements to the right of them, they're non-metals. Now, speaking generally, it's not entirely accurate to say that all of the elements to the left of that staircase are metals. The reason being that there is one non-metal that's to the left of that staircase. It's hydrogen. Because hydrogen is a non-metal. It is a non-metal. It's a gas at room temperature. It doesn't conduct heat and electricity well. It's not malleable, it's not, ductile, it doesn't have any of the properties of metals, but when it comes to chemical reactions and how it deals with, and I'm sorry if I made a huge pop right there saying but so emphatically, what it does is that hydrogen just behaves like a metal. In a chemical reaction, the thing that we're concerned with for metals really is, do they gain or lose electrons? Because a chemical reaction is based off of that. Hydrogen, it loses electrons in a chemical reaction. That's what it does. So in terms of how it behaves, it's a metal. In terms of like what it really is, it's a non-metal. It's a bit like my animals here. So some of these animals are pretty, not at all exciting. But you have, Pumbaa the wild boar. Pumbaa, being a boar and a pig, it's not gonna super pay attention if you are familiar with farm animals at all. They kind of just do their own thing. But you can train them, and they behave differently. The other example that I've used in my life to explain how hydrogen behaves differently from non-metals is that as a non-metal, you're like a dog. But hydrogen is a dog that was raised by cats, and so it behaves like a cat. That's the simplest way I can think to explain it, and if that doesn't make it clear, by all means feel free to leave a comment. I'll try and come up with a different way to explain it, but I'm going to leave it as that for now so as not to get too distracted. For the rest of your periodic table, knowing where those metalloids are, that's what will help determine where you can have the metals and the non-metals, so that way if I say, hey, you have nitrogen, what type of element is nitrogen? Well, if you look at the periodic table, nitrogen is to the right of those 7 elements, so you know that nitrogen, it's got to be a non-metal. So if you know that nitrogen, a non-metal, must have properties like the other non-metals, it's going to be fairly obvious as to how it's going to behave and what it is, and all of its nonsense. So that's the kind of thing that I'm going for here. With a simple explanation like that, that's as easy to understand this part of the periodic table as possible. Now there are other aspects to the periodic table that we are going to have to talk about. You're going to need to know some more things. That's how it is. We're going to talk about periodic trends because the periodic table, it's got trends on it. How those elements are ordered is important. They're in that order for a reason. Needing to know why is super handy for understanding chemistry and science and why things interact with each other. Whether or not you actually want to watch that video when I talk about it later, that's going to be on you. Do you? I think I will end this video here. Hopefully that helped explain it. If not, please drop a comment so that way I can clarify some things. I will be making more videos as time goes on, and I hope that they're just not terrible. If they are, well, that's a shame. Just deal. I will. Have a good one.